Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line here on TVP World. This is where we unpack the biggest business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. If the European Union can be distilled into one number, it's the EU's budget. On Wednesday, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that she would like the next 7-year EU budget to almost double in size to €2 trillion. It's an ambitious proposal, but now the real haggling starts as member states will try to defend their priorities. For Central and Eastern Europe, this means cohesion and agricultural funding, and the stakes are very high, as evidenced by the impact the European money has on the Polish economy. Jan Kennedy has more.
The European Commission has unveiled its proposal for the 2028-2034 budget, and the proposed sum is staggering.
The next MFF will be an ambitious EU budget with a total size of €2 trillion.
This is double the current budget, with €451 billion earmarked for the Competitiveness Fund and €218 billion allocated to less developed regions. Central and Eastern European countries are watching closely to see how much of cohesion funds designed to bridge the development gap with Western Europe they will receive. And so far, it's been a substantial amount.
The region has received EU funding of up to 4% of GDP per year, which is really a lot of money, which has helped to build a great deal of infrastructure. Throughout Poland, for example, you see bridges and highways and cycle networks built with EU regional funding.
Since joining the EU in 2004, Poland has received over €260 billion in funding, nearly two-thirds of it through cohesion policy. These funds have played a vital role in the country's transformation. In fact, almost half of all public investment in Poland, both at local and central level, was co-financed by EU cohesion money. To put things into perspective, out of the €56 billion spent on roads, €25 billion came from the EU, helping to modernise and build over 5,200 kilometres of highways. Nearly 4.4 thousand units of rolling stock and over 2,100 trams and buses were purchased or upgraded with EU support. Moreover, they also financed the construction or modernisation of more than 800 water treatment plants and around 34,000 kilometres of sewers, more than twice the distance between Warsaw and Sydney. Additionally, major projects like the Warsaw Metro, Poland's only underground rail system, or the Świnoujście tunnel wouldn't have been possible without EU co-financing. In nominal terms, Poland has been the biggest beneficiary of EU funds in the entire bloc, but this is set to change in the upcoming budget as Poland catches up with its EU peers.
We are growing off the EU funds. The more developed country we are, the less will be the role of EU funds in our development. So it's natural process to say that it will hamper Polish growth. Yes, it will hamper Polish growth, definitely.
Still, as the Polish economy continues to grow, EU funds are set to play a gradually diminishing role in its future expansion.
From the Polish angle, there is pressure on Piotr Arak, the EU's budget commissioner, to strike a good deal for Poland. We now know the budget we're looking at is worth €2 trillion, definitely more than was anticipated in recent weeks. To discuss what we know so far and what might come next, let's bring in Piotr Arak, chief economist at VeloBank. Hello, and thank you for coming in today.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
So, €2 trillion committed to the EU budget. It's definitely more than we've been expecting, almost twice as much as the ordinary EU budget, but around the same amount when we take in recovery funds. And just to remind our viewers, this is the additional money the EU has borrowed on the financial market after the pandemic to jumpstart the European economy. What are your thoughts about this headline figure?
Well, yeah, it is big. So the previous budget has been sold by Ursula von der Leyen as a big budget, as a change-making budget because of its size, because of the additional borrowing after the COVID 2020 pandemic, and the recovery funds that increased the budget. The original sum actually is lower. So the previous cohesion funds, agriculture policy, innovation, and everything else, which was in the multi-annual financial framework, was smaller than expected. And this was the need of negotiations 7 years ago ago. So the frugal states as Austria, Denmark, Netherlands demanded that this budget is going to be smaller for the additional financing with debt to proceed basically, and to Europe have common debt in that year. And we're not doing the same story again. So we're not going to have more common debt. But the interesting part about the budget is that we're going to see EU taxes. So the plastic tax that we now know, and probably this year we're going to be paying out of our own pockets, not only our all taxpayers' money, because our budget does pay additional fees to the European budget on plastic. We're going to see, for example, ETS1 going from the state budgets to the EU budget. So the current tax on CO2 emissions that businesses, industries pay in Poland would be an EU tax. And this means, of course, a pressure on the public finances side, because it means that we're going to increase the deficit level of Poland or some other countries which do see additional revenue from this stream of taxation.
So it all comes with strings attached. So obviously this figure, 2 trillion euros, is big. Probably sounds initially quite impressive, but do you actually think that this figure is realistic?
Well, depends. In previous years, we saw changes from around 2% to 10% on the specific budget pipeline. So it might change quite a lot in terms of the size, and probably the one budget that I see additional increases in is agriculture. If agriculture is going to remain 300 million, that means it's by a quarter smaller than in the previous multi-financial framework. So it means that, for example, the agricultural sector in Poland or in Bulgaria, Romania, in France is going to receive less money than it is receiving right now. And we saw a lot of tension in the agricultural sector throughout the last 2 or 3 years after the entrance of Ukraine to the single market after the war, and the goods coming from Ukraine, and the additional tensions if those same businesses, those same farmers are not receiving the same amount of money that they were in the previous years. It means that, this could be very problematic for the governments that will support this.
And we already see protests gathering outside in Brussels. And also Ursula von der Leyen mentioned that this budget might be renegotiated depending on whether there are new members joining the EU. So who do you think might actually join during this time, the 7-year period? And how do you think that this budget might actually be renegotiated on account of that?
Yeah, well, you could see those kind of elements to it, that you could have a small member country entering, and the pre-accession money has been proposed previously. So this was information given by the European Commission in the days before, that we're going to see pre-accession money going to Moldova. So most probably, as Charles Michel announced in Bled a couple years back in Slovenia, that we're going to see new accessions in by 2030, we could see some countries, for example Moldova, as a country entering the European Union. It might be as well North Macedonia. It could be some other countries from the Balkans. Moldova, I would say, is the most probable country in the next 5-year period of time to enter the European Union.
We also know that what the spending priorities are going to look like. We have 451 billion euros for competitiveness and 218 billion euros for less developed regions. Do you think that these cohesion funds will be in both categories or just in the latter one?
Probably the European Commission is going to say that it's in both places, but most probably it's just going to be the smaller budget that could be then redistributed to the regions that need additional financing in order to have increased cohesion. I do see here another deal breaker for some countries, because we expected to have, as the Polish stance, to have at least the same amount of money on cohesion, and we're going to see lower amounts on agriculture, smaller money for the less developed regions in Poland, in some in Romania and Bulgaria. This creates additional political tension. Most probably this envelope that is going to be presented then to the capitals could be then renegotiated, because with this new budget, the governments in Warsaw or in Budapest or Bucharest could decide to change their priorities. So we could spend less on innovation and then more on agriculture, for example. But that would be at the expense of innovation. So I'm not totally sure that everybody in our region is going to be happy.
Absolutely, because if indeed it is the case that cohesion will appear only in that second bucket, shall we say, then Poland and Central and Eastern European countries might actually lose up to 40% of cohesion funds, and that's huge.
Yeah, and we had issues with the previous innovation buckets or funds or budgets that have been presented by the European Union, because we don't get sufficient proportional to the size of the economy, to the size of the demography, the population of our region, amounts of money. We have less developed R&D sectors, less developed universities. We just don't get that amount of money on the innovation side. So it means that more or less the more advanced economies are going to be benefiting from that part of the budget, not us.
At the moment, we're looking at 300 billion euros for agriculture. At the moment, it's been 400 billion euros. So it's quite a significant cut when you look at it, knowing how much farmers have been struggling. Yeah.
So might be a deal breaker. And there's also what Piotr Arak said. So the elements of rule of law applicability is going to be for all the whole budget. So it doesn't mean just the RRF as in the previous budget. It means all financing, also agriculture. So for a government in Budapest, which not always apply all the regulations and checks and balances and has some difficulties with rule of law, it might mean that they're not going to vote for this budget.
We have 131 billion euros for space and defense. I mean, given how well Poland is doing in terms of achievements regarding space, we've just had Sławomir return back to Earth. This is good news for Poland.
Yeah, if it's going to turn out to be also some business opportunities. So, this is additional expenditures. It could be some R&D, but is it actually going to create new business vendors and new opportunities in Poland? I'm not so sure. With the previous budgets, with cohesion, with agriculture, we saw all those macroeconomic effects because we build infrastructure, we build roads. You saw these increases in the value of the Polish GDP, basically because of consumption and investment. So very easy to calculate effects on a macroeconomic level of what these funds to create. With innovation, where you're going to see the investment actually creating an additional economic value within 5, 7, 10 years, it might be more difficult. We might not actually see any economic benefits. This is also the question we had with the questions or the problems we had with the next generation budget. Almost none of the EU member states saw any economic benefits. There are some sectors that we saw increase in their productivity, increase in renewable energy storage, for example, more PVs, more windmills in some countries, but the economic value was not created. And this is somehow problematic for the European Commission, seeing that the track record of the last budget is not so great as with the previous ones.
Having listened to Ursula von der Leyen, do you think that she wants to have her cake and eat it? We clearly saw what her priorities were.
Yeah, well, each European Commission's president has to, they have their own agenda, their own priorities. They have their bureaucrats that see some goals that they want to create, and then they have the 27 member states, and also they want to have more members within this time frame. So this is always an impossible task to kind of bridge all these differences, all the goals, all those political forces, changes in government, changes in negotiating strategies of some governments. But for sure, as we can see now, agriculture, cohesion, these are going to be the biggest battles that any Polish government or any Central European government is going to be facing in Brussels through the next couple of years. So these might be the things that might say we're going to veto the next budget if some of our goals are not met with the negotiating force in Brussels.
I want to just backtrack a little bit, just to allow our viewers to understand how much Poland has benefited from the cohesion funds and how much they actually mean to Poland. So I just want to bring up a visual just to explain to our viewers how much Poland has actually benefited from that. So let's just bring that up. So in terms of the cohesion funds over the years from 2004 to 2022, as we can see, as the years have gone by over the last 20 years, we can see that there has been a continuous increase of them. So by 2022, 50%, cohesion funds made up 50% of public investments in Poland. And I just want to emphasize that, these funds are not an abstract thing. They make up our parks, our highways, railway tracks, water treatment plants, schools, nurseries, hospitals. And suddenly losing them will make a huge difference. I mean, I'm not saying losing them completely, but losing access to a huge chunk of them. So not getting access to the same amount of them will make a huge difference to Poland.
Yeah, this is going to be, as I say, if this budget is then going to be negotiated and we're going to see what the opposition thinks of it, what the coalition party member states, I'm not saying it's going to be vetoed straight away, but if some of our priorities are not going to be met within the next budget, we might be not a net beneficiary, but a net payer, because at the end, we might not receive the sufficient amount of money from innovation and the competitiveness side, which for sure is going to be easier or more accessible to some other countries if it's going to be redistributed, for example, via Brussels, or then if we're going to have to use this same amount on a Warsaw level, on a national level, and then use the parts of innovation funding just to have the payments to the agriculture sector at the same level. So it means that we might see these effects, but more on consumption, less on investments, which is always worse in terms of the construction of the value creation in an economy.
And speaking of agriculture, Poland has been one of the greatest benefactors of EU funds in that area. And assuming that Poland won't get as much money in that area, with farmers as frustrated as they are, and they are frustrated. It's a narrative that comes and goes, I think, in terms of the media and discussions in Brussels. What happens next? Because living in big cities, we probably don't appreciate the frustrations of farmers in Poland and in other European countries. But this will be something that rises to the surface later on.
Yeah, that's for sure. So when I saw the ETS2 proposal a couple years back, I then working at the Polish Economic Institute, we did a study on how it's going to affect the poorest households within the European Union. And it's not only in Poland, it means also in France, it means Portugal, it means Spain, those places where you have tremendous amounts of money used to heat your housing, and also not thermo-modernized housing as well. So they lack insulation in those places. And I saw this as a political matter that probably is going to be debated for the next couple of years, and I wasn't wrong. So this is also getting ETS1, so the first chunk of the climate policy that European Union created, the tax that we pay on the heating, on the electricity bill straight to Brussels, not to Warsaw, is also going to be very problematic. I'm not seeing this as an easy negotiation kind of LPP argument that any of these capitals is going to have. So I'm not saying that this is going to be an easy game for the current administration in Brussels to negotiate this and have acceptance in some of the member states. And we could argue that we have a Polish commissioner who's responsible for budget, and it could be easier. it isn't so. So it's not as easy where you're going to get a commissioner that is responsible for one of the portfolios, that he's going to be swaying everything just for our benefit. It didn't happen in agriculture. It wasn't easy in competitiveness, and it's not going to be as easy. In my opinion, actually could be even easier if we had somebody from our region, but not directly a Pole, just to get some additional leeway in the negotiation process, because Serafin is going to be looked at by all the 26 other commissioners and by Ursula von der Leyen herself not to be too biased towards Poland. So it's not going to be an easy negotiation in the next couple of years when we're going to see the acceptance of this budget, then any additional changes, if we're not going to have any crises. Because the last budgets, the one created in 2007, had to be adapted when we had the financial crisis. The next one in 2013 was also created in response to the financial crisis. The next one is the pandemic. It's always something happening. This time we're spending more on defense because of the threat of war. Might be also something else that happens, kind of black swan event, and also is going to shape the negotiation process of this multi-annual financial framework.
Okay. Piotr Arak, Chief Economist at VeloBank, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes the bottom line for today. I was your host, Marie Cato. We bring you the best of regional business on Monday to Friday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Goodbye.